Alright, I'm sorry about that interruption there. Let's go down to the next one. So we need to determine the midline, amplitude, and period of the function shown here. We see that our a is 3, so we take the absolute value of that, and that is our amplitude. Our midline is y equals 1. And the period of the function is found by doing 2 pi over b, so that's 2 pi over 2. And so the period for our function is pi. Alright, so to graph it, let's start by putting the midline in there at y equals 1. Next, let's remember that since this is a sine function, it will start at the midline. So when our t is 0, the sine graph will be at the midline. Next, let's look at the period. The period is pi units, and so pi is about 3.14, and so it will complete one period in 3.14. So remember with a sine graph, the sine graph goes up, hits the midline, goes down, and back up. Now it hits the midline halfway into the period. So then we ask ourselves, where is this going to hit the midline again? It's going to hit it halfway in between 0 and 3.14. So that's about 1.57 right here. Next, the sine graph goes up before hitting the midline. How far is it going to go up? Well, let's see what that amplitude is. Amplitude is 3, and so it's going to go up 3 units from the midline here. So it's going to hit a y value of 4 up there. What's going to be the x value when it's that y value of 4? Well, it would be an x, which is halfway in between 1 and 1.57, something a little less than 0.8. Should be about right here. Next, it's going to go up, down to the midline, and then down to the minimum. Since the amplitude is 3, it's going to go down to -2. It's going to hit -2 halfway in between 1.57 and 3.14, which would be about right here. And then, of course, this graph will repeat. Now we're given a graph, we need to find an equation. So first thing I'd like to do is have us identify what the midline is. It appears that the midline is right here, at y equals 1. So whatever our equation is, we're going to have a +1 at the end. Now if we start at an x value of 0, it looks like our graph is crossing the midline before going down instead of up. Now that's kind of unusual because for a sine graph, it starts at the midline, but it starts by going up. So this is basically a sine graph, except it's flipped upside down. See that? And if we continue this on until x was 8, we basically see that this looks just like a sine graph, except flipped upside down. Now the way to express flipping a graph upside down, or reflecting it across an axis, is to have the amplitude number be negative. So this is going to be a negative sine of something. Now what will the amplitude number be? Let's look at the midline. From the midline down to the graph is 2 units, and the midline up to the graph is 2 units. So this is going to be a -2 sine of something. So this will be 2 sine of something. It's going to be a sine of b times some number x. So what is b? Let's remember that the period is given by 2 pi over b. So that's 2 pi over b is the period. Now what's the period? It goes from 0 out to 8, We could also compute it by seeing that it goes from 4 over to negative 4, so that period is 8. So multiply both sides by b, and then divide both sides by 8, and we will get pi over 4 for our b. Next up, 2 at the bottom. We need to graph the following after stating the amplitude, midline, and period. So let's state the amplitude. It's absolute value of this negative 2, which is 2. The midline is y equals negative 1. And then the period, which is 2 pi over 3. Keep, change, flip. Pi's cancel, and we get a period of 6. Let's just take care of things with this one too. Amplitude is 4. Midline is y equals positive 1. And then the period is 2 pi over b, which is pi over 2 for a period. Alright. Now let's go back and graph it. What I'd like to point out is this graph is going to be a reflection. So it's going to be an upside down cosine graph. What I suggest is that we graph this as though it's a right side up cosine graph, and then save this for last. So we'll reflect it last. Alright, so first start by drawing the midline. Y equals negative 1. So let's go down below that axis here. Negative 1. Now, remember that this is a cosine graph, amplitude of 2, and a period of 6. So what we're going to need to do here is change this up just a little bit. I'm going to want to have my axis, x-axis, go by this way. I'm just doubling those x values there. This would be negative 1, negative 2. Alright. So the period means that this graph is going to go from x value of 0 to an x value of 6 to complete a period. Of course, it'll do it across the midline, so about there to there. Next, let's remember that this is going to be a cosine graph with an amplitude of 2. Now remember what a normal cosine graph does. A normal cosine graph starts out above the midline. And so it's going to start out up above this midline here, and it's going to start out with an amplitude of 2. And so it'll be up 2 from there. So the cosine graph starts above the midline, hits the midline, drops below the midline, hits the midline, and ends up above the midline. So it's going to end up 2 units above the midline. Now remember that a cosine graph hits its lowest point halfway through the period. So halfway through at 3, it's going to hit its low point 2 units below the midline. Halfway in between the high point and the low point for a cosine graph, it's going to hit the midline. Same thing over here. It's going to go something like this. Nice smooth curve. Now remember though, I said that the last thing we're going to do is we're going to reflect it across its midline. So we're going to take this negative, and that's going to cause us to flip this upside down, causing our final graph to be this blue one, which is the flipped version of our provisional red graph there. Nice. All right. And lastly, we have a sine graph. So we're going to be starting our graph on the midline instead of above it, like with cosine. Help me out, just stay on the screen there. Sine. Oh well, we'll survive. So, we've got the midline taken care of. Next, the period's pi over 2. So this is going to complete an entire cycle from an x value of 0 to an x value of pi over 2. Pi over 2 is about 1.57, which is right there. Remember that the sine graph starts at the midline, goes up, hits the midline, goes down below, goes back up. So it's going to hit that midline halfway between 0 and pi over 2, which would be a little less than 8/10. So about right there. It's going to hit a maximum value in between these 2 points here. Amplitude is 4, and that means it goes 4 points up from the midline, right there. And 4 points down below the midline, right about there. So our sine graph goes up, back down to the midline, down to a minimum point, and then back up to the midline there. All right, that's what we have for today. See you in class.